Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. As you might guess, I rise in opposition to this rule, to the underlying legislation, and I believe to the entire process that got this bill here today, which I believe represents little more than an opportunity for this Democratic majority to thumb its nose at the Supreme Court's recent ruling upholding the individuals' right to keep and bear arms, while also providing some of its vulnerable members with a meaningless political cover vote leading up to this fall's election. Since taking control of this House almost 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, this Democrat majority has done everything in its power to prevent Republicans who agree with the Supreme Court that residents of the District of Columbia have the right to self-defense. Like every other American citizen, having a vote on this issue is very important. In fact, last year it was the Democrats' need to prevent a vote on this very issue that brought the debate on providing the District of Columbia with a voting member of Congress to a screeching halt. Today, however, the Democrat majority has been forced to bring this measure to the floor because of a rapidly growing bipartisan support for a competing measure to comply with the Supreme Court's affirmation of D.C. residents' constitutional rights. Isn't it amazing? The District of Columbia went to court and found out that they had to follow constitutional rights. And there's also a fear by the Democrat majority that a discharge petition that has already won the support of 166 members of Congress, the passage of which the Washington Post has recently said would be deeply embarrassing to the House leadership and could fracture the party's House contingent. Mr. Speaker, instead of providing real, meaningful policy solutions to make the lives of law-abiding citizens of the District of Columbia safer, today we are taking up a measure that would continue to subvert the wishes of our founding fathers as recognized and affirmed by the Supreme Court, while also allowing members to have a vote on an excellent substitute amendment, which I fear will be dead on arrival when it reaches the Democrat-controlled Senate. This substitute amendment, which I strongly support and have co-sponsored along with 115 other bipartisan colleagues, would recognize that D.C.'s ban on handgun possession in the home violates the Second Amendment, as does the District of Columbia's prohibition against rendering any lawful firearm in the home operable for the purpose of immediate self-defense. To correct this injustice, the substitute amendment would repeal the district's illogical ban on the most popular home and self-defense weapons, restore the right of self-defense in the home, repeal the district's intentionally burdensome registration process, and allow D.C. residents to finally purchase handguns and defend themselves in their own homes. Mr. Speaker, I understand that as early as today that the D.C. City Council may be meeting to address this issue, but I remain concerned about what the same authors of the so-called emergency legislation that violated the Supreme Court's ruling just a few months ago may try to pass in order to continue to drag their feet and to deny D.C. residents their constitutional rights to protect themselves and their families in their own home. This Congress should not be on record trying to avoid what is the law of the land. Because of the Council's demonstrated past willingness to abide by our nation's laws, I believe that it is important that this House pass the substitute amendment on behalf of all law-abiding citizens who want to exercise their constitutional rights within the District of Columbia. Additionally, as the administration notes in their statement of policy on this legislation, the underlying bill in its current form would do nothing more than direct the D.C. City Council to reconsider within 180 days the emergency firearms legislation it passed in July and which will expire in October regardless of this House's action on this matter. This means that if this legislation is passed without the substitute amendment provided for by this rule, the legislation's only effect would be to give the City Council even more time to drag its feet and remain non-compliant with the directives of the highest court in our land. Mr. Speaker, it really should not be so difficult to write a law with the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert this statement of administrative policy in opposition to this bill and in support of the substitute amendment in the congressional record.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I encourage all my colleagues to support the substitute amendment to hold D.C. accountable to the Supreme Court, to the laws of this land, and to provide its residents with all the constitutional rights enjoyed by other American citizens, and to oppose the underlying legislation. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, reserves the balance.